A broke waitress slipped a napkin to a billionaire CEO. 5 words that destroyed his perfect life. Your wife is cheating on you. He fired her on the spot. But here's the thing. She was right. And what happened next? It'll make you question everything you think you know about trust, betrayal, and second chances. Yo, real quick, drop your city in the comments. I want to know where you're watching from. And if this story hits different, smash that like button and subscribe. Your support keeps these stories coming. Trust me, you're going to want to stick around for this one. Let's roll. Manhattan, Upper East Side, 2025. Alexander Lombardi didn't just have money. He had fuck you money. The kind where you wake up in a penthouse that costs more per month than most people make in a year, drive cars that require appointments to buy, and have a personal assistant whose only job is to make sure you never have to think about anything inconvenient. At 43, Alexander was the CEO and founder of Lombardi Tech, a $4.2 billion cloud computing empire that powered half of Wall Street's infrastructure. Forbes called him the architect. TechCrunch called him ruthless. His employees called him the Iceman behind his back. Cold, calculating, untouchable. His Fifth Avenue penthouse was a monument to success. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. Italian marble everywhere. Art pieces that required insurance policies. 62 floors up, insulated from the noise, the chaos, the realness of the world below. He had 3 cars in a private garage. A midnight blue Bentley Continental, a pearl white Maserati Gran Turismo, and a vintage 1964 Aston Martin DB5 he'd bought at auction for $2.3 million. He wore Tom Ford suits, Patek Philippe watches, and Italian leather shoes that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He had everything, except he didn't. Because the woman sleeping beside him every night, the woman who wore his ring, bore his name, smiled in photographs that hung in their hallway. That woman was a stranger. Isabella Lombardi. God, she was beautiful. 38 years old, former Milanese fashion model whose face had graced the cover of Vogue Italia 3 times. Legs for days, dark hair that fell like silk, green eyes that could stop traffic. She moved through rooms like a queen, commanding attention without trying. They'd met at a charity gala 7 years ago. He'd been captivated immediately. Her accent, her laugh, the way she looked at him like he was the only person in the room. Their wedding made page 6. Tech titan weds Italian supermodel in $3 million ceremony. From the outside, they were New York royalty. From the inside, they were ghosts living in the same house. Alexander worked 18-hour days, board meetings, investor calls, product launches. Isabella attended charity galas, shopped on Madison Avenue, had lunch with socialites at places with names like Le Bernardin and Daniel. They occupied the same space, but lived separate lives. They hadn't had sex in 4 months. Maybe longer. Alexander couldn't remember. Late at night, when insomnia hit and Isabella was asleep beside him or pretending to be, Alexander would stare at the ceiling and feel the weight of everything crushing down. The empire he'd built, the life he'd crafted, the marriage that looked perfect in photographs but felt hollow in the dark. Something was wrong. He just didn't know what. Not yet. But he was about to find out. And when he did, it would detonate his entire world. Washington Heights. Same city. Different universe. 15 blocks north. Across an invisible border that separated the haves from the have-nots. Nina Reyes was getting ready for another shift. She stood in the bathroom of the tiny studio apartment she shared with her mother, staring at her reflection. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a tight ponytail, her work uniform, a faded blue polo shirt with Blue Moon Cafe, stitched on the pocket and black slacks that had seen better days, hung loose on her small frame. 5'3", 110 pounds soaking wet. 26 years old, but her eyes looked older, tired, like she'd seen too much, carried too much, for too long. Nina splashed cold water on her face, trying to wake up. She'd gotten maybe 4 hours of sleep. Her mother, Carmen, had been up half the night coughing. A side effect of the medication, the doctor said. Nina had sat beside her bed, rubbing her back, whispering that everything would be okay. Lying, basically, because nothing was okay. Carmen Reyes had suffered a stroke 3 years ago. She was partially paralyzed on her left side now, unable to work, dependent on medication that cost $600 a month, even with Medicaid. Nina had dropped out of community college. She'd been studying nursing, trying to make something of herself, to work full-time at the cafe. Rent was $1,400 a month for their shoebox studio. Utilities were another $200. Groceries, if they stretched them, were $300. Carmen's meds were $600. That left almost nothing for emergencies, for savings, for life. Nina made $15 an hour plus tips. On a good week, she cleared $700. On a bad week, $500, maybe less. She was always 2 paychecks away from homelessness. 1 medical emergency from disaster. But she didn't complain. Complaining was for people who had options. Nina kissed her mother's forehead on her way out. Carmen was awake, propped up in bed, watching Despierta America on their ancient TV. "Be safe, mija," Carmen whispered, her voice raspy. "Always, mommy." Nina grabbed her jacket, a thrift store find, too thin for March, but it was all she had, and headed out into the cold. The subway ride downtown took 40 minutes. Nina stood the whole way, crushed between bodies, her mind running through the day's math. Bills due, hours scheduled, tips needed, survive. That was the only goal. Just survive another day. The Blue Moon Cafe sat on a corner in Midtown, squeezed between a dry cleaner and a bodega. It wasn't fancy. Cracked vinyl booths, linoleum floors that had seen better decades, a neon sign that flickered. But it was home. Inside, the regulars were already gathering. Marco, the 60-year-old cook, was singing boleros in Spanish while scrambling eggs. Tessa, the other waitress, was refilling ketchup bottles, her 2 kids' photos taped to the register. Frank, the owner, a Greek immigrant with tired eyes and a big heart, was going over receipts at the counter, his brow furrowed. "Morning, Nina," Frank said, not looking up. "Morning, Frank." Nina tied her apron, grabbed her order pad, and got to work. This was her life. This was all she had. But tonight, everything was about to change. Because sometimes, survival isn't enough. Sometimes, you have to risk everything to do what's right. And Nina Reyes, she was about to make a choice that would destroy her life and save someone else's. Thursday, March 14th, 2025, 7:47 p.m. The dinner rush had died down. The cafe was quiet. Just a few stragglers nursing coffee. A college kid hunched over a laptop in the corner booth, and an elderly couple sharing a slice of apple pie. Nina was wiping down tables, her mind on autopilot, when the door chimed. She looked up, and her breath caught. The man who walked in was out of place, like dropping a Rolex in a pawn shop. He wore a charcoal gray suit that screamed custom tailoring, a crisp white shirt, no tie. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine. His watch, Nina didn't know brands, but she knew expensive when she saw it, glinted under the cafe's fluorescent lights. He was tall, maybe 6'1", with dark hair graying at the temples, sharp cheekbones, and eyes that looked like they'd seen 1,000 boardrooms and won every negotiation. Alexander Lombardi. Nina didn't know his name yet, but she recognized power when it walked through the door. Behind him came a woman who made Nina suddenly painfully aware of her own faded uniform and scuffed sneakers. The woman was a goddamn vision. 30-something, long dark hair, green eyes, skin like porcelain. She wore a black dress that probably cost more than Nina made in 3 months. Designer heels, and a handbag Nina recognized from a Vogue ad she'd seen on the subway. Isabella Lombardi. They took the corner booth, the one with the ripped vinyl seat that Frank kept meaning to fix. Nina grabbed 2 menus and approached, forcing her customer service smile. "Evening, folks. Can I start you off with something to drink?" The man, Alexander, barely glanced at her. Coffee, black. The woman, Isabella, didn't look up from her phone. Sparkling water, San Pellegrino if you have it. If not, tap is fine. They didn't have San Pellegrino. This was the Blue Moon Cafe, not the Four Seasons. Tap water, coming up, Nina said, her smile tight. She walked away feeling invisible, which was fine. Invisibility was her superpower. But as she poured water and filled Alexander's coffee mug, something felt off. The couple in the booth, they weren't talking. Alexander was hunched over his phone, scrolling through emails, his jaw tight. Isabella was scrolling through her phone. Her expression bored. They sat 3 feet apart, but might as well have been on different planets. Nina had worked the cafe long enough to recognize the signs. Couples who were done, who stayed together out of habit or obligation or fear of being alone. She'd seen it 100 times. But this couple? There was something else, something colder. She delivered their drinks. Alexander grunted a thanks. Isabella didn't acknowledge her at all. 15 minutes passed. Nina took their orders. Alexander wanted a steak, medium rare. Isabella wanted a salad, dressing on the side. They still weren't talking. Then Isabella's phone buzzed. Nina was refilling water at the next table. She saw it out of the corner of her eye. Isabella's whole face changed. The boredom melted. She smiled, actually smiled, like someone had just told her the best news in the world. She glanced at Alexander. He was still buried in his phone. Isabella typed a quick response, then stood. "I need to use the restroom," she announced. Alexander didn't look up. Isabella walked past Nina, her heels clicking on linoleum, disappearing down the hallway toward the bathrooms. Nina cleared their appetizer plates. That's when she saw it. Isabella's phone, face up on the table, the screen still glowing. A text message. "Can't wait to see you tonight, baby. Same place, 10 p.m. I'll bring the champagne." The sender was saved as D. Nina's stomach dropped. She stood there, frozen, a plate in each hand. Oh shit. She glanced at Alexander. He was still typing, oblivious. She looked toward the hallway. Isabella would be back any second. Nina's heart hammered. This wasn't her business. She should walk away. Mind her own damn life. She had enough problems without getting tangled in someone else's drama. But then she looked at Alexander again, and she saw something she recognized. Exhaustion. Loneliness. A man who was working himself to death. Probably thinking his marriage was fine. Probably telling himself everything was okay. Just like her father had done. Just like her mother had believed. Right up until the day he disappeared. Nina thought about her mother. About the years Carmen had wasted on a man who didn't love her. The lies, the excuses, the betrayal. He deserves to know. Her hands were shaking as she pulled a napkin from her apron pocket. She grabbed a pen, one of the cheap Bics they kept at the register, and scribbled quickly, her handwriting barely legible. "Your wife is cheating on you." She hesitated, then added, "Check her phone. I'm sorry, a friend." Isabella's heels clicked in the hallway. She was coming back. Nina's pulse roared. She folded the napkin, slipped it under Alexander's coffee cup, and walked away fast, her legs shaky. She disappeared into the kitchen, her heart trying to punch through her ribs. Marco looked up from the grill. "You okay, Chica? You look like you saw a ghost." Nina couldn't speak. She just nodded, grabbed a tray of food, and forced herself back out into the dining room. Isabella had returned. She was sipping her water, scrolling through her phone again. That little smile still on her face. Alexander was picking up his coffee cup. The napkin fluttered onto the table. He saw it. Nina watched from across the room as Alexander unfolded the napkin. Read it. His whole body went still. Then he looked up, straight at Nina. Their eyes met, and Nina knew she'd just changed both their lives forever. 4 words, that's all it took. "Who's D?" Isabella looked up from her phone, her expression smooth. "What?" Alexander's voice was low, controlled, but Nina could hear the edge in it. "Your phone. Who's D?" Isabella's eyes flickered, just for a second. Then her mask slid back into place. A friend. Why are you asking? Show me. Excuse me? Show me your phone, Isabella. Now other diners were looking. Nina stood by the register, her hands gripping the counter. Isabella's jaw tightened. Alexander, you're being paranoid. Then prove I'm wrong. Show me your fucking phone. The cafe went silent. Isabella stood, slow and deliberate. She grabbed her Prada handbag, her movements sharp. I'm not one of your employees. I don't answer to you. Isabella, I'm leaving. And she did. Just like that. No explanation, no fight. She walked out, the door slamming behind her, leaving Alexander sitting there with a cooling steak and a napkin that had just detonated his marriage. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Alexander stood. His chair scraped against the floor. He turned, his eyes scanning the cafe, and locked on to Nina. You, he said. Nina's blood turned to ice. He crossed the room in 3 strides. Up close, he was taller than she'd thought. His face was a mask of fury and pain. Who gave me this? He held up the napkin, his hand shaking. Nina's voice came out small. I don't know, sir. Bullshit. Don't lie to me. I'm not. You wrote this. It wasn't a question. Nina's throat closed. She nodded. Why? I saw text on her phone. I thought you should know. Alexander's laugh was bitter. You thought you should interfere in my marriage? You thought you had the right? Sir, you just destroyed my life. His voice was quiet now, deadly. Do you understand that? You took one look at a text message and decided to blow up everything. Tears burned Nina's eyes. I'm sorry, I thought... You thought wrong. He turned to Frank, who'd come out from behind the counter. Fire her. Frank's eyes went wide. Alexander, hold... Fire her. Now. Or I'll make sure the health department inspects this place every week for the next year. The threat hung in the air. Frank looked at Nina. His eyes were sad, apologetic. Nina, I'm sorry. You gotta go. The room tilted. Frank! Now, Nina. Nina's hands shook as she untied her apron. She dropped it on the counter. Marco was staring from the kitchen window. Tessa looked like she might cry. Nina grabbed her jacket and walked out into the cold March night. Alone, jobless, and absolutely certain she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. 2 weeks later, Alexander Lombardi hadn't slept in 48 hours. His penthouse, his sanctuary, had become a prison. Isabella had come home that night at 2 a.m., her makeup still perfect, her story rehearsed. I was at Diane's. We had wine. I'm sorry I overreacted. He'd wanted to believe her. God, he'd wanted to, but he couldn't. Over the next days, he watched, really watched, for the first time in years. Isabella's late nights multiplied. Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, yoga class, book club, charity committee meeting. She always showered the second she got home. Always scrubbed her skin raw, like washing away evidence. Her phone was always face down, always password protected, always gone when he got too close. She laughed more, but not at him. At texts, at calls she took in the other room, her voice dropping to a murmur. Alexander hired a private investigator. James Rothstein, ex-FBI, the best in the business. Cost him $5,000 a week. 3 weeks, Rothstein came back with nothing. She's careful, Rothstein said, sitting in Alexander's office. His report, thin. No hotel check-ins under her name. No suspicious credit card charges. She's either innocent or she's a hell of a lot smarter than most cheaters. Alexander's fist hit the desk. Then dig deeper. Mr. Lombardi, with all due respect, if she's covering her tracks this well, you need someone on the inside, someone she won't notice. Like who? Rothstein shrugged. A waitress, a housekeeper, a driver, someone invisible. Alexander's mind flashed to the Blue Moon Cafe, to dark eyes and shaking hands, to a girl who'd risked everything to tell him the truth. A waitress. Nina's life had collapsed. Getting fired from the Blue Moon wasn't just losing a job. It was losing everything. She'd spent 2 weeks applying everywhere. Diners, bars, retail, Starbucks, anywhere that would take her. But her resume was thin. High school diploma, 2 years of community college, 3 years waitressing. No special skills, no connections. And when places called the Blue Moon for a reference, Frank, bless him, tried to help. But word traveled fast in the restaurant world. She interfered in a customer's marriage. Drama. Nobody wanted drama. Her unemployment ran out. Her savings, all $300 of it, evaporated in a week. Rent was due in 3 days. Carmen needed her medication refilled. The fridge was empty, except for a box of rice and a can of beans. Nina started skipping meals, telling her mother she'd already eaten when she hadn't. She took a graveyard shift at a 24-hour laundromat in Queens, folding strangers' underwear for $10 an hour, cash under the table. No questions asked. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday when Alexander Lombardi walked through the door. Nina was folding a fitted sheet, the bane of every laundromat worker's existence, when she looked up and saw him. For a second, she thought she was hallucinating. Sleep deprivation did that. But no, it was him. Same sharp suit, same exhausted eyes. He looked thinner, older. He scanned the room, spotted her, and walked over. Nina froze, a sheet clutched to her chest. "I need to talk to you," Alexander said. Nina's voice came out hoarse. "I don't have anything to say." "Please," his voice cracked. "I think you were right." They sat in his car, that midnight blue Bentley, parked outside the laundromat under a flickering streetlight. Nina felt absurd. She was wearing stained sweats, smelled like fabric softener, and was sitting in a car that cost more than her entire life. Alexander looked like he'd been through hell. His tie was loose, his shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot. "I'm sorry," he said, "for firing you, for threatening Frank, for all of it. I was angry, scared, but I can't stop thinking about that note." Nina stared at her hands. "Why are you here?" "Because I need your help." She laughed, a bitter sound. "Help? You destroyed my life." "I know, and I'll fix it. But first, I need you to help me find the truth." "What truth?" "My wife." His hands gripped the steering wheel. "I hired the best PI in New York. 3 weeks, $15,000. He found nothing. She's too smart, too careful. She knows how to avoid cameras, how to pay cash, how to cover her tracks. So what do you want from me?" Alexander looked at her. "You're invisible. People don't notice waitresses, housekeepers, laundry workers. You blend in. You see things we don't. If anyone can get close to Isabella, it's you." Nina's heart pounded. "You want me to spy on your wife?" "I want you to help me find out if my marriage is a lie." "Why would I do that?" Alexander pulled an envelope from his jacket, handed it to her. Nina opened it. Inside were 10 crisp $100 bills. "That's a down payment," Alexander said. "Help me for 2 weeks. If you find nothing, I'll pay you $10,000 and cover your mother's medical bills for the next year. If you do find something," he paused, "I'll pay you $50,000, and I'll make sure you never have to fold laundry at 2 a.m. again." Nina stared at the money. $1,000, more than she'd make in a month. "What if I say no?" "Then I'll respect that. But Nina, I'm drowning. You threw me a lifeline once. I'm asking you to do it again." Nina looked at him, saw the desperation, the pain. She thought about her mother, the medication running out, the rent due, the fridge with nothing but rice. "What do you need me to do?" They met the next night at a Starbucks in Midtown. Alexander came prepared. He handed Nina a burner phone, a small camera disguised as a pen, and a manila envelope thick with information. "Isabella's schedule," he said, tapping the envelope. "Her yoga studio, her lunch spots, her friends. Everything." Nina flipped through it. There were photos. Isabella at a restaurant. Isabella shopping. Isabella getting into a black Mercedes. "You've been following her?" "Rothstein was, before I fired him." Nina studied the photos. Isabella was always alone, always on her phone, always smiling at something or someone who wasn't there. Tuesdays and Thursdays, Alexander said. Those are the nights she comes home late, says she's at book club or yoga. But her yoga studio closes at 8 p.m. And her book club friend, Diane? I called her. There's no book club. So where does she go? That's what I need you to find out. Thursday, April 4th, 8:47 p.m. Nina stood across the street from Isabella's yoga studio, a bougie place in Tribeca with floor-to-ceiling windows and women in $200 Lululemon sets. She wore all black, a hoodie, jeans, sneakers. Her hair was tucked under a baseball cap. She looked like every other New Yorker trying to stay warm. Invisible. At 8:15, Isabella emerged. She was dressed down, yoga pants, oversized sweater, sunglasses even though it was dark. She got into her black Mercedes and drove. Nina followed on foot for 2 blocks, then caught a cab. Follow that black Mercedes, she told the driver. The driver raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. This was New York. He'd seen weirder. They drove for 15 minutes. Uptown, East Side. Isabella's car pulled up to a hotel. Not just any hotel, the Carlyle. Nina's stomach dropped. The Carlyle was the hotel. Old money luxury, discreet, expensive. The kind of place where celebrities and billionaires went when they wanted privacy. Isabella got out, handed her keys to the valet, and walked inside. Nina paid the cab driver and followed. The lobby was opulent. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staff in tuxedos. Nina felt like a fraud in her hoodie and sneakers. She watched from behind a column as Isabella approached the front desk. The clerk smiled, handed her a keycard. Room 712. Isabella disappeared into the elevator. Nina waited 5 minutes. Then she followed. The 7th floor was silent. Plush carpet muffled her footsteps. She found room 712 at the end of the hall and pressed her ear to the door. Voices, muffled but audible. A man's voice, deep, smooth. God, I missed you. Isabella's laugh, breathy. Nothing like the Ice Queen tone Nina had heard at the cafe. I missed you too. Does he suspect anything? Alexander? No. He's too busy playing corporate king. Good. Because I'm not interested in sharing you. You don't have to. Nina's hands shook as she activated the camera pen, recording audio. She stayed for 10 minutes, heard enough. Then she walked away, her heart hammering, and called Alexander. I found her, Nina said. Who is he? Alexander's voice was tight. They were sitting in his car, parked 2 blocks from the Carlyle. Nina had just played him the audio recording. His face was carved from stone. I don't know, Nina said. I couldn't see him. Then we find out. The next day, Alexander made a call. The Carlyle's general manager, Richard Stern, owed him a favor. Alexander had invested in Stern's son's startup 2 years ago. 1 phone call, 1 favor cashed in. Stern sent over the reservation details for room 712. Dante Rossi. Alexander stared at the name. Do you know him? Nina asked. Alexander's laugh was hollow. Yeah, I know him. Dante Rossi, age 36, the Italian venture capitalist. They'd met at a charity gala 2 years ago. Isabella had introduced them. Alexander, this is Dante. He's an old friend from Milan. An old friend. Alexander remembered shaking his hand. Smooth palm, firm grip. Dante's smile had been easy, charming. Isabella's told me so much about you, Dante had said. It's an honor. They'd chatted for 10 minutes. Alexander had liked him. Thought he seemed genuine, an old friend from Milan. Not a friend, a lover. Alexander sat in his office, the revelation sinking in like a knife between his ribs. 2 years. His wife had been fucking another man for 2 years, in hotel rooms. While Alexander worked himself to death building an empire she enjoyed spending his money on. His hands shook as he poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey, drank it in 1 swallow. He called Nina. I want proof, he said. Undeniable. I want to catch them together. I want to see it with my own eyes. How? We set a trap. Saturday, April 13th, 7 p.m. Alexander Lombardi's penthouse was filled with people, a small, intimate dinner party. 10 guests, investors, business partners, socialites. Catered food, expensive wine, jazz playing softly in the background. Isabella was the perfect hostess. She wore a red dress that clung to her curves, diamonds at her throat, her smile radiant. She moved through the room like a dancer, charming everyone. And seated near the window, a glass of wine in hand, was Dante Rossi. Alexander had called him 2 days ago. "I'm putting together a small dinner party, some investors. I'd love to discuss a potential partnership. Are you free Saturday?" Dante had accepted immediately. Now he was here, in Alexander's home, sipping Alexander's wine, smiling at Alexander's wife. Nina was there too. She wore a black server's uniform, white shirt, black vest, black slacks. Her hair was pulled back tight. She moved through the room with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, invisible. Just another member of the staff. She watched Isabella and Dante carefully. They didn't touch, didn't even stand close, but their eyes met across the room. Again and again. A silent language, hunger, anticipation. Nina felt sick. At 9:30, Isabella excused herself. "I need to check on dessert," she said, disappearing toward the kitchen. 2 minutes later, Dante stood. "Restroom," he muttered, heading the same direction. Nina caught Alexander's eye. He nodded and followed. Alexander found them in the hallway outside the kitchen. Isabella's back was against the wall. Dante's hands were in her hair, his mouth on hers. They were kissing like the world was ending, like they'd been starving and finally found food. Alexander's voice cut through the air like a blade. "Isabella!" They sprang apart. Isabella's face went white. Dante's smirk faltered, then died. For a second, nobody moved. Then Isabella tried. "Alexander, don't." His voice was cold, dead. "Don't you fucking dare. It's not what it's exactly what it looks like." He turned to Dante. "Get out, now." Dante hesitated. Then he grabbed his jacket and ran like the coward he was. Alexander and Isabella stood alone in the hallway. The party chatter continued in the other room, oblivious. "How long?" Alexander asked. Isabella's mask cracked. Tears filled her eyes. "Alexander, please." "How long?" 2 years. The words hit him like a punch. 2 years. 2 years of lies, of hotel rooms, of coming home and kissing him with another man's taste on her lips. "Why?" His voice broke. "Because you were never here." Isabella's voice rose. "You chose your company over me, over us. I was lonely, Alexander. Dante made me feel alive." Alexander laughed bitterly. "He made you feel alive, so you destroyed our marriage? You destroyed it first. You chose work. You chose money. You chose everything except me." Alexander stared at her. This woman wearing his ring. This stranger. "Get out," he said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my house. Tonight. Pack your shit and leave." "Alexander? Now." Isabella flinched. Then she turned and walked to their bedroom, her heels clicking on marble. Alexander stood alone in the hallway, his empire of glass and steel suddenly feeling like a tomb. Nina appeared beside him. Her voice was soft. "I'm sorry. Don't be." He looked at her, really looked. "You saved me from wasting more years on a lie. Thank you." Nina nodded, her throat tight. In the other room, the party continued. Champagne glasses clinked. People laughed. Nobody knew that a marriage had just died in the hallway. The divorce was brutal. Alexander's lawyers were sharks. They used Nina's recordings, the Carlisle security footage, phone records. They dismantled Isabella's claims piece by piece. She'd wanted half his fortune, $2.1 billion. She got $10 million and a non-disclosure agreement that would ruin her if she ever spoke publicly about the divorce. Dante Rossi's reputation tanked. Investors pulled out. His firm collapsed within 6 months. Last Alexander heard, he'd moved back to Italy, his tail between his legs. Isabella disappeared to somewhere in Europe. Alexander didn't care where. He threw himself into work. 18-hour days became 20. Board meetings, product launches, acquisitions. He was building, always building, trying to outrun the emptiness. But late at night, in his penthouse overlooking the city, Alexander thought about the girl who'd slipped him a note. The girl who'd risked everything to tell him the truth. Nina Reyes. He called her. Nina stared at her coffee, watching steam curl into the air. What did she want? Nobody had ever asked her that before. Her whole life had been about what she needed: food, rent, medicine, survival. Wants were luxuries she couldn't afford. "I don't know," she said finally. Alexander leaned forward. "Then let me tell you what I see. I see someone who's brilliant at reading people, who notices things nobody else does, who has more courage in her pinky finger than most people have in their entire bodies." Nina's cheeks flushed. "I'm just a waitress who got fired for—" "You're not just anything." His voice was sharp. "You stood up to a billionaire in his own home and told him a truth he didn't want to hear." Most people spend their entire lives avoiding confrontation. You walked straight into it because it was right. That's not common, Nina. That's rare. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to hire you." Nina blinked. "To do what?" "Whatever you want. Start as my assistant, learn the business. I'll pay for college, full ride to any school that accepts you. Columbia, NYU, hell, Harvard if you want. You pick the major, you pick the path. And while you're in school, you work for me. Learn how my company operates. Learn how deals get made, how empires get built." Nina's head spun. "Why would you do that?" "Because you saved my life, and because I see potential in you that you don't see in yourself yet. I don't belong in your world." "Neither did I." Alexander's voice softened. "My parents were working class. Mom cleaned houses. Dad drove a cab. I built Lombardi Tech from nothing. Trust me, you belong anywhere you decide you belong." Nina's throat tightened. "I can't leave my mom." "So bring her. I'll arrange for the best medical care in the city. Home nurse if she needs it. Physical therapy. Whatever it takes." Tears burned Nina's eyes. "Why are you doing this?" "Because 7 years ago, I married the wrong person. I ignored every red flag, every instinct, because I was too proud to admit I'd made a mistake. You risked everything to tell me the truth. The least I can do is give you a chance at the life you deserve." Nina wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "What if I fail?" "Then you fail, and you try again. That's how it works." Nina looked at him. This man who'd lost everything and was somehow still standing, still fighting. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, I'll try." Alexander smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Good. You start Monday." 6 months later, Nina Reyes stood in the conference room on the 42nd floor of Lombardi Tower, looking out at Manhattan stretched below like a glittering circuit board. She wore a navy blazer, white blouse, black slacks, clothes Alexander had insisted on buying her for work. "If you're going to sit in boardrooms, you need to look like you belong there." She still didn't feel like she belonged. But she was learning. The first weeks had been hell. Nina had fumbled through presentations, struggled with corporate jargon, felt like an imposter surrounded by Ivy League graduates who spoke in acronyms and wore confidence like cologne. But she had something they didn't: instinct. Nina could read a room in 30 seconds, could spot when someone was lying, when a deal was about to fall apart, when an investor was bluffing. Skills she'd learned surviving, reading her mother's pain levels, judging which customers would tip well, knowing when to push and when to back off. Alexander had noticed. He'd started bringing her to meetings. At first, just to take notes, then to observe, then to contribute. "What do you think?" he'd ask after a pitch. Nina would hesitate, then speak. "The numbers look good, but he's overselling." Notice how he touched his face 3 times when he talked about projected revenue? He's not confident in his own forecast. Alexander would lean back, studying her. "You're right. Walk away from this one." The deal would collapse 2 months later. exactly as Nina had predicted. She'd enrolled at Columbia, night classes, business administration. The scholarship Alexander arranged covered everything: tuition, books, fees. Her days became a marathon. Work at Lombardi Tech from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. Classes from 7 p.m. to 10 p.m. Home by 11 p.m. Homework until 1 a.m. Sleep for 6 hours. Repeat. Carmen was thriving. Alexander had arranged for a specialist, Dr. Sarah Chen, one of the best neurologists in the city. Physical therapy 3 times a week. New medication that actually worked. Nina came home one night to find Carmen standing in the kitchen, without her walker, making arroz con pollo. Mija, Carmen's face glowed. Look! Nina had burst into tears right there in the doorway. At work, Nina was making waves. She'd suggested Lombardi Tech partner with community colleges to create coding boot camps for low-income students. You're always complaining you can't find talent, she'd told Alexander. Stop looking at Harvard and MIT. Look at people like me, people who are hungry, who'll work twice as hard because they know what it's like to have nothing. Alexander had run with it. The Lombardi Fellowship Program launched that fall. 20 students, full scholarships, job placement after graduation. Nina helped select the candidates, interviewed kids from the Bronx, Queens, Washington Heights, kids who looked like her, talked like her, came from nothing like her. This was your idea, Alexander told her at the launch event. You should present it. I'm not ready. Yes, you are. Nina stood on stage that night, her hands shaking, her voice small at first, but growing stronger. She told her story, dropping out of college, working at the cafe, the note that changed everything. I was invisible, she said. Most of you probably wouldn't have noticed me if I'd served you coffee, but someone saw me. Someone gave me a chance. That's what this program is about, seeing people everyone else ignores. The applause was thunderous. Afterward, a woman approached her, late 30s, sharp suit, kind eyes. That was beautiful, the woman said. I'm Rebecca Torres. I run the Community Investment Fund at Goldman Sachs. I'd love to talk to you about expanding this model. Nina had looked at Alexander panicked. He'd grinned. Go talk to her. You got this. And somehow Nina did. 1 year later, Alexander Lombardi realized he was in love with Nina Reyes on a random Tuesday in October. They were working late. The office was empty except for them, the cleaning crew humming vacuum cleaners in the distance. Nina was at the conference table, buried in spreadsheets for the Q4 budget, her hair falling out of its bun, her blazer draped over her chair. She was muttering to herself in Spanish, scribbling notes, completely absorbed. Alexander looked up from his laptop and just watched her. When had this happened? He tried to pinpoint the moment. Maybe it was when she'd called bullshit on his marketing team's campaign and been proven right. Maybe it was when she'd stayed until 3 a.m. helping him prepare for a board presentation. Maybe it was the time he'd found her crying in her office after a particularly brutal class, and instead of hiding it, she'd looked at him and said, I'm scared I'm not smart enough for this. You're the smartest person in this building, he'd told her. That's not true. Yes, it is, because you're not afraid to admit what you don't know. Everyone else is too busy pretending. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe it was the way she made him laugh. Really laugh, not the polite chuckle he gave at board meetings. The way she challenged him. The way she saw through his bullshit and called him on it. You're spiraling, she'd said last week when he'd been obsessing over a competitor's product launch. I'm being thorough. No, you're catastrophizing. Stop it. Nobody else talked to him like that. He liked it. No, he loved it. Shit. You okay? Nina looked up, catching him staring. Yeah. Alexander cleared his throat, just thinking. About? About how you changed my entire life. About how I can't imagine this company without you. About how somewhere between the divorce and now, you became the most important person in my world. About the Morgan pitch, he lied. We need to tighten the deck. Nina groaned. It's midnight, Alexander. Can we tighten it tomorrow? You're right. Go home, get some sleep. What about you? I'll head out soon. Nina gathered her things, paused at the door. Hey, Alexander? Yeah? Thank you. For everything. I know I don't say it enough, but you changed my life. You changed mine first. She smiled, then left. Alexander sat alone in his office, the city glittering 62 floors below. He was in love with Nina Reyes, and he had absolutely no idea what to do about it. 3 months later, January 2027. Nina had been working at Lombardi Tech for 18 months. She'd finished her first year at Columbia with a 3.8 GPA. The Lombardi Fellowship Program had expanded to 5 cities. She'd been promoted to Director of Community Partnerships, youngest director in company history. Her mom was walking again. Really walking. Carmen had even started volunteering at a community center, teaching kids to cook traditional Mexican dishes. Nina's life was unrecognizable from 2 years ago. And yet, something was wrong. She was falling in love with her boss. It had happened slowly. So slowly, she hadn't noticed until it was too late. The late nights working together. The way he listened when she talked. The way he pushed her to be better. The way he'd shown up at her college graduation with flowers and a card that read, "Proud of you," doesn't even begin to cover it. The way he looked at her sometimes, like she was the only person in the room. Nina tried to ignore it. This was her boss, her mentor, the man who'd saved her life. Getting involved would be stupid, reckless, career-ending. But her heart didn't care about logic. They were in his office on a Friday night. Everyone else had gone home. Nina was packing up her laptop when Alexander spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why don't you date?" Nina froze. "What? In 18 months, I've never seen you with anyone. Never heard you mention dating. Why?" Nina's cheeks flushed. "I've been busy. School, work, my mom." "That's an excuse. It's the truth." "Nina." Alexander stood, walked around his desk. "You're brilliant, beautiful, and kind. You should have people lining up. So why don't you date?" Nina's pulse hammered. "Why do you care?" "Because He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. "Fuck. Because I care about you. You're my boss. I know. This is inappropriate. I know that too." They stood 3 feet apart. The air between them crackled. "Alexander, I can't. I'm in love with you." The words tumbled out. "I've been in love with you for months, maybe longer. I know it's insane. I know it's a terrible idea. You work for me. I'm older than you. I'm a disaster of a human being who's been divorced and clearly has terrible judgment in relationships. But I can't stop thinking about you. And I needed to tell you, even if it ruins everything." Nina couldn't breathe. "Say something," Alexander whispered. "Even if it's, you're fired." Nina's voice shook. "I can't lose this job. I can't lose this." "You won't. Even if you tell me to go to hell, you won't. I promise." "But what if, Nina, do you feel anything for me, yes or no?" Nina looked at him. This man who'd been nothing but kind to her, who'd believed in her when nobody else did, who'd given her a life she'd never dreamed possible. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I do." Alexander closed the distance between them. His hand cupped her face. "Can I kiss you?" Nina nodded, and when their lips met, it felt like everything clicked into place. They kept it quiet at first. Dating your boss was tricky. HR nightmares, power dynamics, office gossip. They agreed to be careful. Professional at work. No public displays. No favoritism. But outside the office, Alexander took Nina to dinner at places she'd only read about in magazines. The kind where there were no prices on the menu, and the waiters wore white gloves. Nina felt out of place at first, imposter syndrome hitting hard. But Alexander would reach across the table, take her hand and say, "You belong here. Stop overthinking it." They walked through Central Park on Sunday mornings, drinking coffee, talking about everything and nothing. Alexander told her about his childhood, growing up poor in Queens, his dad's gambling problem, his mom working 3 jobs. how he'd clawed his way to success and somewhere along the way lost himself. Nina told him about her dad leaving, her mom's stroke, the years of barely surviving. "We're both fighters," Alexander said one morning, watching ducks glide across the pond. Maybe that's why this works. Carmen adored Alexander. He'd show up at their apartment. Nina had moved them to a bigger place in a safer neighborhood, with takeout from her favorite Dominican restaurant, and he'd sit at their tiny kitchen table, listening to her stories, laughing at her jokes. "He's good for you, mija," Carmen told Nina one night after Alexander had left. "He sees you, really sees you." "I sees him too, Mommy." "Good. Don't let this one go." 6 months into their relationship, Nina moved into Alexander's penthouse. It felt surreal at first. Nina Reyes, former waitress, former laundry folder, living 62 floors above the city in a glass palace. But Alexander made it feel like home. He cleared out closet space, bought a coffee maker Nina actually knew how to use, hung photos Carmen had taken of Nina as a kid. "This is our space now," he said. "Not mine, ours." At work, they maintained boundaries. Nina reported to someone else now. Alexander had restructured to avoid conflicts of interest. She earned her promotions, proved herself in meetings. Nobody could say she was there because of favoritism. Well, some people said it anyway. Nina heard the whispers. She slept her way to the top. She's only here because she's fucking the CEO. It stung, but Alexander reminded her, "Let your work speak for itself. That's all that matters." And it did. The Lombardi Fellowship Program was now in 12 cities, helping hundreds of students. Nina's community partnerships had brought in $50 million in new business. She was invited to speak at conferences, featured in Forbes 30 Under 30. She wasn't the waitress anymore. She was Nina Reyes, Director of Community Impact, and she'd earned every damn bit of it. 2 years after the confession. The Blue Moon Cafe. Alexander brought Nina back to where it all started. The cafe looked different now. Frank had finally fixed the vinyl booths, repainted the walls, upgraded the equipment. Business was booming. Mr. Lombardi. Frank greeted them with a huge grin. "And Nina, look at you two." Marco waved from the kitchen. Tessa brought them coffee without asking. They sat in the corner booth, the same one where Alexander's life had imploded 3 years ago. "Why'd you bring me here?" Nina asked. Alexander looked nervous. Actually nervous. Nina had seen him negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat, but right now, his hands were shaking. "Because this is where everything changed," he said. "You handed me a napkin, 5 words that destroyed my marriage and saved my life. I remember. I was angry at you, furious. I fired you, threatened Frank. I was a complete asshole. You were hurting. That's not an excuse." Alexander reached across the table, took her hands. "But here's the thing. That moment, you risking everything to tell me the truth, that's when I learned what real courage looks like, what real integrity looks like. You could have stayed silent. Should have stayed silent, but you didn't. Because you have a moral compass I've spent my whole life trying to find." Nina's eyes filled with tears. "Alexander, I'm not done." He pulled a small box from his jacket pocket, opened it. A ring. Simple, elegant, perfect. A single diamond that caught the cafe's fluorescent light and sparkled. "Nina Reyes, you saved my life. You changed my life. You are my life. Will you marry me?" Nina couldn't speak. She just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Alexander slipped the ring on her finger. Then he kissed her, right there in the booth. While Marco cheered from the kitchen and Tessa cried happy tears, and Frank rang the register bell like it was New Year's Eve. "Yes," Nina finally managed to say. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." The cafe erupted in applause. And somewhere, in a universe that believed in second chances, in notes scribbled on napkins, in waitresses who refused to stay silent, somewhere, everything clicked into place. They got married 6 months later, not at some 5-star hotel or exclusive venue, at the Blue Moon Cafe. Frank closed it down for the day. Tessa and Marco decorated. White lights strung everywhere. Flowers on every table. The cracked vinyl booths covered in silk. It was small, intimate. 50 people who actually mattered. Carmen sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face, looking healthy and radiant. Frank walked Nina down the aisle. Marco catered. Tessa was maid of honor. Alexander's board members looked confused. Why are we in a diner? But Alexander didn't care. This is where it started, he'd told them. This is where it should begin again. Nina wore a simple white dress, no designer gown, nothing fancy. Just her, beautiful and real. When Alexander saw her walking toward him, his breath caught. "You're stunning," he whispered when she reached the altar. "You're not so bad yourself," she whispered back. The officiant was brief. The vows were personal. Alexander went first. "Nina, you taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right even when you're terrified. You gave me truth when I needed it most. You gave me hope when I'd lost everything. You gave me love when I didn't deserve it. I promise to spend the rest of my life trying to be the man you see in me." Nina's turn. "Alexander, you saw me when I was invisible. You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me a chance at a life I never dreamed possible. But more than that, you let me see you, the real you, not the CEO, not the billionaire, not the Iceman, but the man who cries at sappy movies, who calls his mom every Sunday, who leaves notes on the fridge reminding me to eat breakfast. I love that man. I'll love him forever." There wasn't a dry eye in the cafe. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Alexander pulled Nina close and kissed her like she was oxygen. The cafe erupted in cheers. Later, at the reception, Nina looked around at the people who'd shaped her journey. Carmen, healthy and smiling. Frank, beaming with pride. Marco and Tessa, already drunk on champagne. Rebecca Torres from Goldman Sachs. The Lombardi Fellows, kids whose lives had changed because Nina refused to stay silent. And Alexander, her husband, her partner, her home. "What are you thinking?" Alexander asked, pulling her close for their first dance. "That I wrote a note that destroyed your life?" "No." Alexander shook his head. "You wrote a note that saved it." Nina leaned her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. In the kitchen, Marco started singing Besame Mucho. The whole cafe joined in. And Nina Reyes, former waitress, former laundry folder, former invisible girl, danced with her husband under white lights in a diner that smelled like coffee and fresh starts. The Blue Moon Foundation, 2032. The press conference was packed. Journalists from every major outlet. Cameras everywhere. Nina Reyes Lombardi stood at the podium, Alexander beside her, their hands intertwined. Behind them, a banner. The Blue Moon Foundation, empowering communities one voice at a time. 5 years ago, Nina began, her voice steady, I was a waitress who saw something wrong and refused to stay silent. That choice changed my life, but it also taught me something crucial. One voice matters. One choice matters. One moment of courage can ripple outward and change everything. She gestured to the screen behind her. Images flashed. Kids in the Lombardi Fellowship Program. Small businesses saved by community grants. Families lifted out of poverty. The Blue Moon Foundation is built on that principle. We find people who are invisible, who society overlooks, and we give them resources, education, opportunity. Not charity, investment, because everyone deserves a chance to be seen. The statistics scrolled. 2,000 scholarships awarded, 500 small businesses funded, $200 million in community investment. But here's the thing, Nina continued. This isn't about me and Alexander. This is about every person in this room who has a choice to make. When you see injustice, do you stay silent? When you see someone struggling, do you look away? Or do you risk something, even something small, to make it right? She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd. I wrote 5 words on a napkin. That's all it took. 5 words. And it changed 2 lives. Then 4. Then hundreds. Then thousands. Imagine what your 5 words could do. The room was silent. So here's my challenge. Don't wait for someone else to be brave. Don't wait for the perfect moment. If you see something wrong, speak up. If you see someone drowning, throw them a lifeline. If you have power, use it to lift others up, not to build walls around yourself. Nina looked at Alexander. He squeezed her hand. Thank you, she said. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing that one voice matters. Now go out there and use yours. The applause was deafening. Later, after the press had left and the lights had dimmed, Nina and Alexander sat alone in the foundation's office. On the wall hung a framed napkin. Faded, wrinkled, barely legible. Your wife is cheating on you. The note that started everything. Do you ever regret it? Alexander asked. Writing that note? Nina looked at him. At the man who'd been broken and rebuilt. At the life they built together. At the thousands of lives they'd changed. Never, she said. Not for a second. Good. Alexander pulled her close. Because I don't regret it either. Best thing that ever happened to me. They sat together, watching the city lights flicker below. And somewhere out there, someone was making a choice. Seeing something wrong. Deciding whether to stay silent or speak up. Nina sent a silent prayer to whoever they were. Be brave. Your voice matters. One choice can change everything. Because it did, and it would again, and again, and again.